to you today's speaker, Dr. Chiara Loschi, who will be talking about empowering voices, digital technologies, and counter-narratives on environmental and socioeconomic crises in North Africa. Chiara is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the ERC project Processing Citizenship, Digital Registration of Migrants as Co-Production of Citizens, Territory in Europe at the University of Bologna. PI is Professor Annalisa Pelizza. From 2018 to 2020, she was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Vienna for a project funded by the Austrian Research Fund, the EU Border Protection Regime, the cooperation between EU agencies and consequences for fundamental rights, directed by Dr. Sluminski. And she was a CNRS researcher in Tunis from 2017 to 18. In the project EU Unpack on European crisis management in Libya. Well, Chiara knows Tunisia very well as she's been living there. She was living there for several years between 2013 and 2018, and also conducted research in Western Libya. She obtained her PhD in political science at the University of Turin, with a thesis entitled Sweeping Too Much Dirt Under a Small Carpet, How Local Rubbish Collection Reforms Uncover the Destabilizing Force of Authoritarian Persistence in Tunisia. And in that context, we met before when you presented a paper on this at the ECPR, actually. So very happy to that you make it, and you will be the first speaker in our seminar series. And I'm very happy that Dr. Federica Zardo from the Danube University in Krems will be discussing Chiara's contribution. Federica is a political scientist working at the intersection between international relations and public policy with an empirical focus on the European Union's external relations and migration policy. She obtained her PhD in political science and international relations at the University of Turin with a thesis on EU-Tunisia relations, which was published in 2020 with Palgrave Macmillan. From 2016 to 21, she has been working as assistant professor at the University of Vienna at the Center for European Integration Research. In March 21, she joined the Danube University now as a senior researcher, where she's working on external dimension of EU migration. So thanks so much to both of you, and we're very much looking forward first to the presentation of around 20 minutes and then Federica's comment. And with that, I pass on to you, Chiara, and of course invite you to share your screen as well.
So thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be the first and to break the ice despite hectic times and complicated phase of work and news. My presentation will be slightly different from what announced, but only for, let's say, security and safety reason. So empowering voices, digital technologies, and counter-narratives of crisis in North Africa. And actually, I am focusing on the case of Tunisia, which is particularly compelling, as is always in our research in North Africa. So I'm focusing on Tunisia, and I'm using it as a case study, let's say, to discuss theoretical tools in order to refine, problematize research topics, strategies, and whatever we can discuss during the Q&A session. In order to do so, I would start from a contextualization, some background information that justify my choice and also my slight difference in the presentation. What I'm going to share today is also the, let's say, the basis of a position paper on which I'm working on, and for that reason, any inputs, any comments or critics, it's much welcomed, more than welcomed. So I'm focusing on Tunisia and especially the presidency of Kais Saied. And I've studied from 2021, which is a pivotal year in authoritarian restoration, as you may well know. In 2021, in July, Tunisian President Kais Saied issued an emergency declaration, firing the prime minister, freezing the work of the parliament for 30 days and assuming all executive power. 2022, he issued a decree dissolving parliament and seized control of the judiciary. And July 2022 launched a referendum on the new constitution that finally eventually replaced the 2014 famous constitution. In this constitution, in all this process, parliamentary immunity was lifted and leaving room for members to be prosecuted on political motivated charges. There is also a decree 117 issued on September 22, announcing the continued suspension of parliament, among other measures. It is also the beginning of targeting civil society, political participation at large. In every case, people took to the street to protest and to claim democracy or against these authoritarian practices. Organizers and protesters were repeatedly shut down, attacked. Multiple reports include also a report about incidents where Tunisian police beat protesters, attacking them with water cannons, and a level of violence that was kind of unprecedented. If we think about the Tunisian political life from 2011. So they are really, they marked really going back to past strategies. 2022-2023, this year, there are some pivotal moments. There has been the new parliamentary elections, first and second round, with a highly low turnout. International observers were underlining that these were the lowest turnout since 2011. And concerning the results, all the opposition parties boycotted elections, from left-wing to Islamist groups close to Sayed, however, claimed that their members wanted more seats in the new parliament, and supporters, however, were also lost their runoffs. But this year is a very important, for negative issues, very important year, and I'm focusing here on two main topics. One is the beginning of strongest prosecution of Islamist party members and left-wing opponents. They started to be imprisoned, detained for hours for interrogations, and you may very well know that Rashid Ghannouchi has been the leader of Nada Islamist party, has been put in prison, and some days ago, the day before yesterday, his detention was prolonged for another 15 months. And the charges were always the one that we hear in these cases, in this context. Terrorist activities, financial issues, and so on. Also, GTT, the National Trade Union, the protagonist of the Tunisian uprisings in 2011, some of its members have been arrested, and they organized also a protest. But the other point that I wanted to stress is that in February of this year, in parallel to this prosecution of people, Kais Saied claimed and released an official statement on the Presidency of Tunisian Republic Facebook page, and also on video, of course, a statement in which the president claimed that there is a conspiracy underway to transform Tunisia into a purely African country that has no affiliation with Arab and Islamic nation. He claimed there are parties that received huge sums of money after 2011 in order to settle irregular migrants from sub-Saharan Africa in Tunisia. He stressed that it was necessary to put an end to this phenomenon, and especially with the hordes of irregular immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa reaching Tunisia. This is a strategy of scapegoating while appealing to an old trope, which we as researchers also know as racism against the Black minorities, connecting this old trope with insecurity and instability, and this argument of great replacement that we also know in Europe. Targeting Black minorities and external threat. Indeed, there is a French personality that backed Sayed declaration. So, but it's the first time that we hear this kind of argumentation on the public speech of political political authorities, while at the same time some cities in Tunisia are being exposed to the phenomenon, and its population is very much sharing some of the population, of course, some of these argumentation. And another thing that I want to stress in these last 12, 14, 15 months of political life in Tunisia is the decree, the cybercrime law that has been introduced in September 2022. And this actually was on the table in Tunisian political legislative life since 2015, but it is now that we have seen this as a cybercrime law approved that seek to combat crimes related to information and communication systems. And we see this in a more general context of returning of authoritarian upgrading and authoritarian repression of everyone who is protesting against Sayed. I'm copying here some of the articles, two articles in particular, 24 and 9. Article 24 stipulates that anyone who deliberately uses information and communication networks and systems to produce, promote, publish, transmit, or prepare false news, statements, rumors, or documents that are artificial, falsely attributed to others with the aim of attacking the rights of others, harming public security or national defense, spreading terror among the population, shall be punished for imprisonment for 5 years and a fine of 50,000 dinars. Penalty shall be imposed on anyone who deliberately uses information system to disseminate fabricated news containing personal data or attribution on true matters, and Article 9 enables, especially this one is important, security services to ask to receive any sort of information data stored by an information system or carrier related to the telecommunications traffic, its user, or other data that would help to uncover the truth of a crime. We see a very much vague and much room left language, and very much room left for security authorities to infringe penalties, prosecutions, to go into details of Facebook groups and communication between citizens and so on. And this is kind of new for Tunisian. It's spectacularly detailed, and the text very, very worrisome. And this law, accompanied with all the political repression, beatings, and prosecution also online, it's particularly evident that it's a very tricky situation, and many observers and researchers and colleagues are already stressing that the so-called civil society in Tunisia is not active anymore, or at least not beyond the huge and strongest big organizations that can more or less survive. So against this context, against this background, the idea is to understand some issues, how to do research. What does entail activism, digital activism now? How analyzing it and updating research toolkit. Browsing scholarship, we can see that political participation is a topic. Since 2011, there are many articles on Mediterranean politics, a Journal of North African Studies, and other journals that have been doing assessment of political participation. Also, on Journal of North African Studies, there is a very interesting special issue coordinating among others by Thierry Derue, and with very, very good scholars. But at the same time, there is less work on digital repression, but there is this interesting article on Mediterranean politics on the Arab uprising as the return of repression by Maria Joshua and Miriam Eden. And also I found very, very interesting the POMEP studies 43 on digital activism and authoritarian adaptation in the Middle East, published in 2021. It's before all this Tunisian authoritarian repression, but still this special issue, this POME study, mobilized the notion of digital authoritarianism, which is not defined in theoretical terms, but it accompanies all the issues. And I'm quoting it because it's interesting to set the scene of the theoretical research in the field. Mark Lynch, in the introduction of the study, it says it is no longer 2011. And we are now aware, since years, not now, that the internet is clearly not a liberation technology per se. The idea has been dismissed by evidence. We see authoritarian incumbents using and creating ways to capitalize on digital technologies for repression and control. And the ubiquity of online infrastructures has eased the new forms of digital authoritarianism, which means it is used to mean surveillance, manipulation, disinformation, and repression. So social media are no longer used for political mobilization only, they are a tool of control. As a digital authoritarianism scholar, sociologist and political scientist Ron Dybert says, social media are far from incompatible with authoritarianism. And this is nothing new for other Arab countries. They were purchasing technological infrastructure and tool even before 2011 in order to control their citizens, also in the case, for instance, of Egypt. But now it has reached a very compelling dimension, this phenomenon. And at the same time, I very much like this idea stressed by Mark Lynch that we have to acknowledge that the social media have woven themselves into the fabric of everyday life with implications of social, political, and cultural dimensions. So this ambivalent position of social media and technological infrastructures is the key, I think, to keep in our mind. In general, I see that the scholarship on MENA region is working on digital surveillance, digital technologies used by authoritarian incumbents to survey, to control their citizens and their civil society organization. There is also a focus on European states or member states, on international Western states selling technologies to these countries, and also on the creation of new complex agglomeration of actors, private, public, citizens, experts, and so on. These are the new venues in which research can be found. But then the question arises, in my opinion, what is left of the role played by platforms today with reference to mobilization and activism in the MENA region? To what extent the notion of digital authoritarianism can explain it, and how to study digital approaches to counter authoritarian practices. So as I said, digital authoritarianism is mobilized as a notion, but it's not defined. And I summarize this as a way in which authoritarian leaders exploit digital tools with authoritarian objectives. But at the same time, I think it is not necessary. It is necessary not to dismiss forms of activism by and through digital technologies. Activism evolves, actors find new strategies, change platforms, leave Facebook, use other instruments, and so on. There is also digital knowledge and literacy in information technologies and surveillance strategies by the same activists, that they are aware of what is going on. So they evolve around alongside activism. Social media do not disappear, and they're not completely dismissed, and they also have a political value. So I'm using here only official images and names of organizations that are strongly imbued in the Tunisian society. They are not put under risk by my humble speech now. So against the speech by Kai Said that I mentioned earlier on against the Black minorities, there is an anti-association in Tunisia that is still active on Facebook. And one of those days they wrote, La Tunisie ne sera pas fasciste comme le voudrait Kai Said, same in Arabic. And also Al Jazeera covered the protestation that went after the speech. We see some hashtag, we see some the drawings and panels still used. At the same time, these hashtags, they are not always connected to a mobilization on Twitter and so on. They often used on Facebook, but still it's not guiding the protestation, the mobilization. And I'm going to explain this in a moment. Also by my personal information, by colleagues and also older support fixers. Facebook groups have been emptied, people left. Some groups working on freedom of religion, for instance, have been emptied because they were full of, in Tunisia, but also in other Arab countries, full of police disguising themselves as a normal user, catching and trying to dig information about the people in those groups. So now the groups are no longer active and are empty. And some of those activists on religion freedom, for instance, they used Facebook to say I converted, I came back to Islam. Islam is my religion. So they also used Facebook, and these were very proactive activists against Islam, for instance. They completely changed, and the suspect is that they are obviously exploiting Facebook as a way to rebrand and cancel, eliminate their older profile. And the suspect is that it is not a free choice. But still organization, as I said, and also organizations are sharing knowledge through Facebook, but also other platforms, other social media, other tools, continuously changing names and so on. But also, as colleagues of mine confirmed, Facebook can be used in some cases, in a case of boats in a shipwreck in South Tunisia, where young people try to leave for the Harka. And in a case of a shipwreck, for instance, family immediately use Facebook because Facebook is in our daily life, as we said 1 minute ago. So it is the mean and the tool that we have in our hand, that everyone has in its hand, in a mobile phone. So they call for each other to know who was on the boat, who has died, who has disappeared, in order to rebuild the knowledge of what was happened. So Facebook also allows for organization of seminars, debates, academic and not, and organizations that are working, for instance, against racism in Tunisia. I also attended one of these meetings last May. They use Facebook, and these are no less political because there are some organizations working with Black minorities, Tunisian citizens, to build bridges by non-violent means and so on. And they can find a meso level of mobilization and stay between the lines, but still conveying a political message. On the environmental issue, the discourse is much longer, and we can do it in the debate if we want. But what I want to stress is that actually environmental issue is a matter of framing. So there are organizations framing environmental issue as a political problem, as a health problem, as a democratic problem in every case. And I refer here to Jamie Furney's book chapter in a book that is very interesting on that. Very much detail. So it's true that we are not in 2011, but daily life and political participation is intertwined with social media, albeit digital authoritarianism, and actors and citizens still exploit social media. So I think that we should problematize the link social media, social movement organization, and collective action. Whereas social media native tools are seen as a resource mobilization strategy in terms of coordination and reaching of contact. And also the idea we have to problematize that social media convey a cultural logic enhanced by new technologies, organizing society based on horizontal collaboration and participatory democracy and coordination. I think that mobilization by and with social media is much more complex and contingent, precarious, temporary, but not less political. And this is where I'm trying to go into the conclusion by introducing a new theoretical scheme that I want to mobilize. So bear with me some minutes still from explaining what I want to say. I turn to science technology study, and especially to actor network theory, in order to try to empower and enrich our toolkit for research. I want to mobilize actual network theory because it's very useful to detect this contingent, precarious, and temporary character of this kind of mobilization through and by social media. In my opinion, it's very useful because as it was born in late 70s, 80s, in the context of Bruno Latour's studies in the laboratory at the Salk Institute, where he applied an anthropological gaze to the semiotics of the practices that led to the production of scientific facts. And he found that a variety of activities that support and link scientists, engineers with ideas, groups, and technology can be summarized as a network. And the idea of hardcore network theory, which is a very rich and diverse approach, it's radically relational. It's a method for mapping how every object or actor is shaped in its relations. Social entities and their inherent differences grow in the web of relation and don't pre-exist those relations. There are no pre-established entities or clearly differentiated conditions. So it is a web of actors, entities, interest, objects, human and non-human, and materials that are related and involved in social action and enacted by the same relations. So I think that we can include actors, social media, IT tools, devices into the study of collective action only if we consider them as a part of a network, adopting this actor network approach. That is not pre-established, but contingently enacted by the web of relations in which they find themselves in the moment. So this is an assemblage, you can also say a network, but an assemblage. It's a precarious contingent association between different actors and part of action. And I don't want to say that we have to dismiss political dimension, because the risk is also this one, to lose the political, structural and the power dynamics at play and repression at play, but it's also a way to emphasize a more accurate image of authoritarian power on one side and a better framework for digital counter-authoritarianism, and find political expression also in some neglected or under the radar daily practices. So as a conclusion, I would say that the social analyst's work now is then to reconstruct dynamics of composition and recomposition, translation done, and practices of translation and association between materially heterogeneous entities, and understand how they mobilize a world and enable courses of action. So in this relational dimension, I think that it stands the answer to my question, how to study digital activism and so on, in order to problematize links and theoretical links that we take for granted. And with this, I stop, and I thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Many, many thanks. Okay, Federica, are you ready to share some thoughts about that contribution? Thanks.
Yes. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much, Chiara, for sharing your project, your ideas. I think that's, well, the research agenda as you presented is extremely rich, and I believe that setting an analytical framework for the analysis of digital authoritarianism and the response by civil society, by citizens, by the network is extremely valuable. So because it can be applied not only to other countries, but also to different areas, to different policy areas, for instance, to different sectors. And I found the suggestion to use actor network theory interesting, because if I think about my own research area that has now become more the governance of migration, where technology has permeated actually the governance of migration, identifying the evolution of the network and of power relations within the network, where technology is included as an actor to some extent, can really advance a bit more than the knowledge of governance dynamics, I believe. So I think that if you already reach the stage of setting and clarifying the analytical framework, that could be extremely valuable to then use it then in different sub areas. So my first question is more generally about how, also based on your first preliminary analysis, how can you operationalize digital authoritarianism? Because I think that if you unpack it, you might be able to then identify the objectives and the strategies used in the case of Tunisia by the Tunisian regimes. So I think you might find, and you mentioned it at some point, you have surveillance and control, but you might also have censorship, you might have propaganda, you might have restrictions that you mentioned, so legal restrictions to access to internet and so on. And I think that depending on the strategy that you observe, the network that responds to these acts actually might change or not, but that's a question. So I was wondering if you already have some ideas about what have been, so in which which objectives have so far, you mentioned some of them, but if you could expand a little bit more on which objectives, which strategies the Tunisian regime used so far, and if you saw different responses based on the different strategies. And the second more broad question, is about the reliance on actor network analysis. I was wondering if you already have some expectations about how also based on your knowledge of the past, about how the network changed. So which actors do you expect entered the network or left the network? And this on both sides, the state's actors, but also societal actors, and which type of dynamics you expect to observe. So besides the more general repression reaction dynamics, if you might expect some other type of relationship between actors, so providers of some technical knowledge, for instance, providers of social knowledge, social capital, for instance, because I believe this is I mean, in a network analysis, I believe that one important aspect is to identify the networks, the actors, but the second important aspect is to identify which type of relationships do actors have within the network and how the strength of the relationship evolves over time. So I was wondering if you have some expectations with regard to that. And in this analysis of network, if you expect that also some international actors might have played a role, and which one? So, for example, the European Union, but also World Bank, and in general, external actors. If you expect that they are participating and influencing the network and digital activism in general in North Africa, in Tunisia and in North Africa more broadly, or not. So what's the impact of the local and the impact of the international? And the final point, which is more also based on your past knowledge that you have on territorial differences, on the local dimension of social movements in Tunisia, I was wondering how have the territorial differences influenced the landscape of digital activism in Tunisia. So during the uprisings, but also in this period of soulmate, somehow, if you saw in your preliminary work some differences of actions and digital activism in the cities, for example, or in the periphery, or in rural areas, for instance, and based on that, if you have expectations what you could find in as a response to digital authoritarianism. I stop here because I think I already touched upon a lot, and then there might be also some time for some questions after your response. Thank you. But again, thank you very much for the interesting projects. It's fascinating.
Thanks so much, Federica. Lots of important questions. Chiara, do you want to answer now? Would you like to collect more? We have 20 minutes, as you wish, actually.
I think I will answer now.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, great.
Further request. Yeah, very interesting, challenging question. Thank you, Federica. So how can you operationalize digital authoritarianism? Well, actually, yes, as I said, there is no unequivocal definition of digital authoritarianism. It has been created to talk about Russian and China strategies on digital surveillance and so on. And it is a very interesting notion. Then it has been developed here and there, exploited, used, and so on. There is also a report produced earlier this year, who the author is mentioning that digital authoritarianism should have an infrastructural approach, and she's mobilizing STS, literature, science, technology studies, in order to argue for an infrastructural approach. So I think that so far everyone can use digital authoritarianism to the extent that can be it can be applied for many objectives. In my case, I would like to find a definition that allows some room to not only target authoritarian strategies, but also an environment in which different social actors can be enabled by these strategies. And in my personal opinion, it would be very interesting to look, I think, at the legal framework, because Tunisia has been producing this cybercrime law, for instance, but it's something very interesting. And also the trainings, and many scholars and colleagues of mine are working on that. The trainings that European member states or Switzerland, in some cases, is delivering to police authorities in the frame of counterterrorism and also preventing violent extremism. These are two different agendas that now are blurring their boundaries, because there is also a way in which you can view practice and practice of surveillance also by this training. So I think there is some research going on, so we will see something on that. But I would include in this definition also, for instance, this particular aspect. Second question, reliance of actor network theory and many expectations. Yes, the network is what is contingently created in a specific moment you observe this reality. It's hugely empirical. It's also a theoretical provocation. This theory is sometimes it's very complicated to make it more general as a theory. It has not always the power to be generalized, but yes, I am expecting to look at the relations in the way in which they change and they enable different profiles for actors, and also digital information systems that have been somehow developed, introduced in Tunisia in the last years. So as the law mentioned, as a cybercrime law, say that security forces have the power to gather information from information systems. They acknowledge, the law acknowledge and crystallize the idea that information systems have knowledge to share, which seems naive, but it's not, if we think that we are not in a very established democratic country. I mean, in an authoritarian setting, this is a very interesting and compelling implication. So there is not only the spreading of using of information technologies and information systems, they are mentioned information systems as a tool to gather data, but also to gather knowledge, and that they enable specific knowledge. The idea, for instance, of actor network theory applied would be to see what are the voices in these information systems flag menu, for instance, which kind of data they are gathering, or which kind of people, Tunisian, other Arab country nationals, irregular migrants, as the Tunisian law and the president are using, which kind of biometric, personal, and so on. And also, I think there is research going on that the use of biometric data by non-state actors is very interesting, by international organizations. It's one of the high salient area, and I'm not working on that, but I know there is some work going around on that. So with actor network theory, I would say that I can put more or less on the same stage information system, Tunisian authorities, French, German, Italian, Ministry of Interiors, and member states, Ministry of Interiors, at the same level, to see who is more or less enacted by this kind of relations, and what is the relations. What is the impact? International actors, yes. Yes, World Bank. Yeah, as we discussed together some years ago, yeah, World Bank is a very it's a very special kind of international actor. So when there is a loan in the scene and conditionalities along with it, there are other implications and response by the recipients. And for instance, I would like to mention the case of the International Monetary Fund loan that Tunisia has not accepted, and it's crystallized more or less. But Sayed said, we don't want this for many reasons. Still in this external manipulation argumentation, but at the same time, by chance stressing a very important issue that has been debated for many years, that international financial institutions are asking for core reforms on which not only authoritarian states are built, so to cut subsidies on fuels, bread, and basic consumer goods, but also the daily life of citizens. So it's a very tricky situation. And World Bank is working strictly with Tunisian authorities since years, also to reform pension systems. So it's very complicated to say what can do the World Bank. And the EU is a different actor, can be a diplomatic actor, but it has lost more or less this ambition. But again, in my opinion, the very much needed eye on Tunisian authorities would be on the judicial systems. In my opinion, the independence of the judicial system and the establishment of authorities able to oversight ex ante and expose the activities, and a way to look at the law enforcement activities on the ground. Of course, it's super ambitious, I would say, expectation, but still, I think that this is still urgent since the uprising, since the 2011, not from now. Territorial dimensions, yeah. In my years of research and with my colleagues, we discussed all the big projects asked by World Bank were implemented in coastal areas where the biggest cities and the observers were. This is also some form of colonial legacy that confirm that big cities like Lariana, not mentioned Tunis, but Sousse and Djerba is where the tourists are, where the main economic activities are. So all the projects on solid waste management, which were asked by World Bank, and they included a form of privatization, they were implemented where they could have been seen and manipulated by the authoritarian regime. And this is also interesting to see at the territorial cleavages, because it is also a way to problematize and diminish the argumentation that the internet is a liberation tool. Very few scholars still think that the internet was a liberation tool. Everyone knows that they organized the revolts by the SMS if necessary. It wasn't an internet revolution. This was a naive journalistic view in the early months. But still, internet could have it had a very interesting dimension in Tunisia by all the activists on internet that were mobilizing against the censorship before. So there is also this dimension of activism, but it was a parallel activism, it wasn't the vehicle and the reason. So I'm still expecting them very different. For instance, if we adopt an infrastructural approach, if we want to see the infrastructures, the cables, who is connected to internet, which are the main providers, it's Orange, it's Tunisiana, it's Orido, it's what, and who are the countries behind Orange? It's French, some members from the Gulf. So this is where I would expand the research also in order to understand if there is room for that, which is also allows to not endanger respondents by asking them, where are you mobilizing, which is your strategy, which is your profile, and so on. So a more infrastructural approach and network of IT structures and coding could be more interesting. I'm stopping here.